I was 17 that May in Paris, old enough to know the weight of the world, too young to think I could do anything about it. I lived just a few streets from the Taron family, though I didn't know them well. In those days, everyone in our neighborhood kept to themselves, polite nods at the bakery, brief conversations in the line for the butcher, but not much more. Even so, news traveled fast in that part of the city. I remember that evening, May 26, 1964, because the air was warm and heavy, the kind that makes you restless. The street lamps glowed like watchful eyes in the dusk, and the children played in the courtyards long after dark. I'd heard later that Luc had been fighting with his mother that night, something about money, a few francs taken without permission. A small thing, maybe, but in a boy's mind, it was everything. He told her he would never come back. Words meant to sting in the heat of anger, no more. But that night, they turned out to be a promise. By morning, word spread. The boy was missing. His parents had gone to the police when he didn't return. Some said they were overreacting, that boys that age always found a way back by dawn. But I remember the way the neighbors' voices sounded that morning, too quiet, like they were holding their breath. I went to work as usual, but all day, I couldn't stop thinking of Luc. 11 years old, alone in the dark. Paris could be kind, but it could also swallow you whole if you weren't careful. In the woods at the edge of the city, the forest of Verrières was no place for a child to wander at night. The next morning, we heard the news. They'd found his body in the forest, not far from the road that led out of town. He'd been killed. I didn't want to hear how. The older boys whispered about it behind the school, but I wouldn't let myself listen. Some things are too much to hold in your mind. There was a quiet that settled over our street then. Even the birds seemed to sing more softly, as if they knew that something terrible had been let loose in the world. A funeral was held soon after. I watched from a distance as they carried the small coffin up the steps of the church. His mother's face was pale and still, like a statue carved from grief. His father moved like a man underwater, slow, heavy, as if every breath was an effort. People brought flowers, left candles in the square. But none of it made any difference. We thought that was the end of it. A terrible tragedy, yes, but a final one. The kind you try to put behind you, even if it never truly leaves. But we were wrong. I thought it was over after the funeral, that the boy would be laid to rest and the city would return to its quiet rhythms. But only a day later, the first letter arrived. It was all anyone could talk about, how the parents received a message from someone who called himself the Strangler #1, describing in gruesome detail what he had done to Luc. I didn't see the letters, of course. They were private, sealed away in police files and the haunted memories of his family. But the rumors spread like fire. People said the letters were written in a careful hand, polite even, like the writer wanted to be understood, like he wanted to be seen. That was the part that struck me most, the need for attention, for recognition. As if the horror he'd inflicted wasn't enough. As if he wanted the world to know his name. The police said nothing at first. They thought it might help to keep the details quiet, to deny the killer the fame he seemed to crave. But the Strangler #1 kept writing anyway. 55 letters in total, each one a twisted boast, a confession wrapped in cruelty. He wanted them to print his full name in the papers, the #1 he signed with. He wanted to be remembered. In those days, I'd walk home from work and feel the weight of those letters in the air, though I'd never seen them. It was like a stain that spread over the neighborhood, seeping into every conversation, every glance exchanged over cafe tables. Mothers held their children's hands a little tighter. Fathers stayed up late, peering out windows, listening for footsteps that never came. I'd lie awake at night, the hush of the city around me, and wonder about the boy. How he must have felt in those final moments. How he might have called out for help that never arrived. And I'd wonder about the man who did it. What kind of emptiness lived in someone who could kill a child and then brag about it in letters? It was a fear that lived in your bones, the kind you couldn't shake off even in the bright light of morning. I remember the day they said the killer had made a mistake. How he'd written about stealing a Citroën 2CV and using it to commit another murder. But there was no second killing. No second body. Just a stolen car with blood in the seats and a man who came to the police to report it missing, a man named Lucien Leger. I didn't know Lucien, not really. I'd seen him around, a quiet man, quick to smile but with eyes that never quite met yours. When the police brought him in for questioning, people said he answered in clipped phrases, short and sharp, like he was reciting lines from a play. And he smiled, that was what everyone remembered. The way he smiled when they asked about the blood. After that, everything moved fast. The police searched his apartment, found clippings about Luc's death, a draft of a story he'd written called Diary of a Killer. It was enough. Enough to end the whispers and begin the certainty. But even as they led him away in handcuffs, there was a question that clung to the corners of every conversation. Was it really him? Or was this just another layer of the lie? Another mask in a story that had no end? They said Lucien never confessed outright. Not at first. He answered questions in that clipped, rehearsed way, let them search his room without a fight. He let them see the cut-out articles about Luc's murder, the half-written manuscript he called Diary of a Killer. It was enough for the police, enough for the prosecutors. But in the quiet of my own thoughts, it never felt like enough. I remember how people's voices dropped to a whisper when they spoke his name. Lucien Leger. Some said he was always odd, that he watched people too closely, spoke in riddles when he did speak at all. Others said he was a liar, a man who wanted to be feared as much as he wanted to be noticed. The trial took 2 years to come. By then, the weight of what had happened had sunk into the bones of the city, a permanent shadow over every bright street and every quiet park. In the papers, they called him a monster. In court, the psychiatrists called him a narcissist, a man who craved the attention as much as the crime. They said he spoke of himself in the third person, like he was telling a story that didn't really belong to him. But when the verdict came, life in prison, no chance for parole, there was no relief in the faces of those who watched. Just a kind of tired resignation. Because no matter how many times they called him guilty, no matter how long they locked him away, there was still the doubt that settled in the back of your mind like a splinter. I remember the night I heard the news that he'd been sentenced. I walked down to the Seine and stood on the bridge, the city lights reflecting off the water like coins scattered on a black cloth. I tried to tell myself that it was done, that the boy was at peace and the killer was behind bars. But the river just kept flowing, carrying away the light and leaving only the darkness. Some said Lucien's fascination with the case was proof enough. The letters, the way he wove himself into the story until you couldn't tell where the truth ended and the lie began. Others said it was all a performance, that he was a man who wanted to be someone, even if that someone was a killer. I didn't know what to believe. In the years that followed, people moved on because they had to. The world didn't stop turning just because the ground had been stained by a child's death. But for me, for all of us who remembered, there was a kind of silence that never really lifted. You'd hear a child's laughter in the park and feel a chill run through you, the echo of a boy who never laughed again. I never saw Lucien again. He vanished into the stone walls of the prison, locked away with his secrets and his stories. And for a long time, I thought that was the end of it. But the river kept flowing, and the questions never really stopped. Decades passed, and still the name of Lucien Leger lingered in quiet conversations and half-forgotten headlines. He was a man locked away, a shadow behind bars, but his story never really left us. It lived in the empty spaces of our memories, in the way our voices would drop when we spoke of that spring of 1964. I grew older. I left Paris for a time, chasing work in the provinces, trying to put distance between myself and the memories of that summer. But whenever I returned, the city felt different, like every stone still held the echo of Luc's last walk down the street, the last time anyone saw him alive. I'd visit the old neighborhood sometimes, see the children playing in the courtyards where we once stood, and wonder if they knew, if their parents had ever told them about the boy who ran away and never came home. Probably not. Some stories are too heavy to hand down. They said Lucien spent 41 years behind those walls, never once changing his story. He never admitted to the murder, not really. Not until the end. In 2005, they let him out on parole, an old man with a tired smile and a heart that was failing him. Some called it justice served, others called it a mistake. I didn't know what to think. Justice never felt simple after all those years. He gave an interview once, after he was released. Sat in a small room with a reporter and told the story like it was something that had happened to someone else. He said he did it because he saw something of himself in that boy, the same loneliness, the same sadness. I read those words in the paper and felt a chill settle in my chest. Because no matter how many years passed, no matter how many layers of dust settled over the case, it was always that simple, terrible truth at the center, a child's life, stolen. Lucien died not long after, in the summer of 2008. The papers ran the story again, dredged up the old photographs and the court sketches. For a little while, his name was on everyone's lips once more. And then, like all things, it faded back into the silence. But the questions never left. In 2012, and again in 2021, they published books about the case, men who said Lucien wasn't really the killer, that he'd woven himself into a story that didn't belong to him. They said Luke's death wasn't from asphyxiation, that it was something else, an accident, or a different crime altogether. I read those books with the same hollow feeling I'd had since the day they found the boy in the forest. Because for all the pages, all the theories, the truth was still out there, just beyond reach. I don't know what to believe. Maybe Lucien was the Strangler #1. Maybe he was just a man who wanted to be remembered, even if it meant claiming a darkness that wasn't his. Maybe the real killer walked free all those years, blending into the crowd, a ghost in the daylight. What I do know is this: the city never really let go of that night. The forest of Verrières still stands, quiet and watchful, the leaves whispering secrets in the wind. And somewhere in the hush of those trees, I like to think the boy still walks, not as he died, but as he lived. A child with a stolen coin and a fight in his heart, running home down a darkened street that never quite found the dawn. The years since Lucien's death have done little to quiet the whispers. Every so often, a new documentary would air, or another article would appear in the back pages of a newspaper. Faces I hadn't seen in decades would return to my thoughts, framed in black and white photos that never aged while the rest of us grew older. The forest of Verrières, where they found Luke's body, became a place of uneasy fascination. Hikers walked the trails there now, families picnicked in the dappled sunlight, but I knew that in the hush between the laughter and the rustling leaves, the memory of that boy was still there. I could feel it in the air, a kind of waiting. I sometimes wonder if it was the river that carried the truth away. The little stream that ran through those woods, quiet and unremarkable, yet always flowing. Water never asks questions, never offers answers. It just carries everything with it, the way time carries us. The letters the killer sent all those years ago were long since sealed away in dusty police archives. But in my mind, I could still hear the stories they told, how the Strangler #1 described the boy's final moments in such calm, deliberate detail. The way he demanded that the world know his name, as if his cruelty needed an audience to be real. It made me think about how some people need to be seen, no matter the cost. How for some, even the most twisted kind of fame is better than the quiet anonymity of a life that passes unnoticed. I'd stand on the bridges at dusk sometimes, watching the lights flicker on in the city. I'd wonder how many lives were lived just out of sight, how many secrets were carried in the spaces between the buildings. Lucien's face would come to me then, not the face of a killer in the papers, but the thin, pale man I'd passed on the street once or twice. A man who might have been nothing more than another stranger, if not for that night. But it wasn't just Lucien. It was the boy, too, Luc Taron, whose name had become a kind of prayer in our neighborhood. The boy who ran away with a stolen coin in his pocket, whose laughter had once rung through the courtyards. The boy whose absence became a permanent shadow. Some nights, I'd dream of that coin, small and bright in the moonlight, rolling away down the cobblestones as Luke ran. I'd dream of the letters, pages of confession that were both boast and plea. And I'd wake with a tightness in my chest, knowing that even after all these years, the truth was still buried as deep as that forest floor. Because in the end, it was never just about a boy who died or a man who might have lied. It was about the way a single act of violence can echo for decades, how it can slip into the cracks of a city's heart and never quite let go. Sometimes, I still walk the narrow streets of that neighborhood, though so much has changed. The bakeries have new names now, the shop windows are brighter, but when the evening comes and the shadows grow long, it feels like nothing has moved at all. I think about Lucien Leger, about the way his name once rang through the city like a warning. The way he became part of the myth of Paris, a monster in the alleys, a story for children to whisper on cold nights. But myths have a way of hiding the truth, of making it easy to forget the boy at the heart of it all. Luc Taron was just 11, a boy with too much pride to go home after a fight, a boy who wanted to prove he was bigger than the world that felt so small around him. I remember his smile faint, but there if you looked closely. And I remember the way his absence felt like a crack in the pavement, something you could trip over again and again no matter how carefully you walked. The police said the case was closed, that Lucien was the killer, that the forest had swallowed Luke's final breaths, and the letters were the proof of a mind unraveling. But even now, I'm not sure. I've read the books that came later, the theories that said Lucien was a liar more than he was a killer, that the real murderer was never caught, never even questioned. I've learned to live with not knowing, to let the questions settle in the quiet of the night and not reach for answers that may never come. The truth is, for most of us, that's all we can do. The forest of Verrières still stands, the trees tall and indifferent, their leaves whispering in the breeze that carries no secrets. The river still runs at its edge, dark and patient. If it knows what happened that night, it has kept its silence well. For me, the story of Luc and Lucien isn't about what was proven or what was lost. It's about the weight of memory, how the past can linger like a fog that never quite burns off. How even now, after all these years, I can feel that same tightness in my chest when I hear a child's laughter echo through the courtyard. A reminder of how quickly innocence can be taken, of how fragile we all are, really. And so I remember. I remember the boy who ran away, the mother who waited for him to come home, the man who may have been a killer or just a man desperate to be seen. I remember the way the city held its breath that spring, and the way it never truly exhaled. In the end, maybe that's all we have, the memories of who they were and the hollow places they left behind. And the river, still flowing, carrying their secrets out to sea.